My heart sank as my mother-in-law brandished a knife, her words slicing through me like blades. You not only demand our son to handle household chores and childcare, but now you're also after our finances. Get out of this house, you lazy freeloader. You barely bring in $700. A chill ran down my spine as I stood there, sweat beading on my forehead. Despite pouring all my energy into managing the household and looking after the children in lieu of my unemployed husband, I found myself confronted with accusations and hostility. It was a crushing moment, a culmination of frustration and despair. I knew then that I had reached my breaking point. I left the chores unfinished, scooped up my child, and made a beeline for my parents' house. I'm Emily, 23 years old, residing with my husband, our little one, and my mother-in-law. My mind wandered back to the beginning. Richard, my high school's golden boy, a star on the soccer field and beloved student president. His return to our small town after landing a job was met with adoration from everyone. When he approached me, I was taken aback. After a few dates, we dove into a serious relationship. Even now, as adults, he remained my handsome, envy-inducing boyfriend. After graduating from vocational school, I discovered I was pregnant. It wasn't the typical order of events, but I held onto the belief that I could still carve out a happy life with my child and Richard. Our home echoed with discussions about our future post-marriage. How about moving into my parents' place after we tie the knot? Richard suggested. Why? I envisioned just the three of us, our child included, I countered. But won't that be expensive? If we stay with my parents, money won't be a constant worry. With both of us working, we could afford our own place, couldn't we? Well, about that, my income this month is pretty dismal. How bad? I pressed. Less than $1,000. What? How is that possible? I thought you were working at an IT company. I quit. Now I'm trying my luck at the casino and picking up part-time gigs. The casino? Why would you do that? My disbelief hung heavy in the air. It turned out he had quit his job after only a month. If you're okay handling all the expenses, I'm fine with fitting an apartment, he stated matter-of-factly. His detached demeanor left me feeling uneasy, questioning if I was the only one truly invested in our fresh start together. Sensing my apprehension, he grasped both of my hands firmly. It's just temporary until I secure another job. I'll make you happy, Emily. I'll take care of all the household chores and child rearing until then. Trusting in his assurances, we exchanged vows. Our journey together began in his parents' home. Following a safe delivery, I pledged to give my all for my son. Both Richard and my mother-in-law appeared content, and I eagerly anticipated our shared journey ahead. However, even after our son was born, Richard neglected his responsibilities, opting to spend his days at the casino. After the casino again, what about helping with the household chores and caring for our child? I confronted him about his broken promise. Don't you dare tell me what to do. Richard's sudden outburst caught me off guard. Perplexed by the sudden tension, my mother-in-law intervened, drawn by the commotion. What's all this noise? It's just that I'm overwhelmed with work, and she's asking for assistance with chores and childcare, I explained. What? That's a wife's duty. My mother-in-law's response left me stunned. Richard hadn't informed his mother about quitting his job. Instead, he painted me as an unreasonable wife, burdening him with household chores and childcare. Initially, my mother-in-law, who had been kind, grew to resent me after buying into Richard's narrative. Despite his sporadic part-time work and frequent trips to the casino, where he barely earned $700, Richard persisted in his fruitless attempts to double his earnings, often losing everything. I shouldered the majority of our living expenses, which made our lives increasingly challenging. Unable to bear the financial strain any longer, I reluctantly re-entered the workforce. After dropping off our son at the childcare center, I was fortunate to secure a job as a dental hygienist rather swiftly. However, upon returning home each evening, I was greeted by my mother-in-law's tirades. What time do you call this? This isn't playtime. You're a parent, yet all you do is gallivant around. Get dinner started now. In her frustration, she slammed the newspaper she was holding onto the floor, a common occurrence whenever she was upset. My mother-in-law had a volatile temperament, her mood shifting at the slightest provocation. The unpredictability of her reactions left me feeling powerless. Juggling the responsibilities of caring for my young son, working and managing household chores left me mentally and physically drained. Unable to endure it any longer, I resolved to confront Richard once again. I intercepted him early in the morning before he headed out to the casino. Listen, I've reached my breaking point. Can't you lend a hand with our child, even just a little? What? Like I said, I'm swamped. I'm gearing up to find a new job. You get that, right? Or would you prefer I stayed unemployed forever? Imagine the father of your child, Douglas. If you're not happy, just follow orders. But we're barely getting by as it is. I'm covering all our food expenses with my savings, you know. Have you any idea how costly diapers are? You claim to be earning at the casino, yet you never contribute any money. Most of our living expenses were covered by my earnings. Initially, my mother-in-law handled the utility bills, but recently she began requesting $500 per month, forcing me to dip into my savings. Even our grocery bills were eating away at my dwindling funds, leaving me with little left. All I had to rely on was money I had saved from a part-time job during my student days. Enough. How dare you talk back to me? After all, you're the one who moved into my house. Richard, typically gentle, underwent a stark transformation when money or casino matters were involved. His outburst drew my mother-in-law into the room. "What's all this now? Is your wife causing trouble again?" she interjected. "Yeah, she is. She's insisting I do housework, look after the child, and foot the living expenses. And on top of that, What audacity you have, Richard. You ought to be heading to work." "Thanks, I'll handle it from here," Richard declared loudly as he stepped outside. Mother-in-law's eyes narrowed. "You've got some nerve, burdening us with childcare and household chores while demanding money. It's disgraceful." "It's not like that. I'm not making demands. It's just that without a little assistance, life is incredibly challenging. Perhaps you're not managing it well. Are you being careless with money?" Mother-in-law seemed oblivious to the reality. She had no idea that her own son was unemployed and spending all his time at the casino. I had been instructed to stay silent, but I was at my wit's end. "Do you know that Richard isn't bringing in a single cent? He's unemployed because he quit his job." "What are you implying?" "Richard has always been outstanding. Yes, he may have stumbled with his college entrance exams, but he landed a job at a reputable company afterward. He quit that job after just a month. Now, he's always at the casino. I can't sustain us on my savings alone." "That's absurd. Stop spouting nonsense." Mother-in-law vehemently rejected my claims. Her son, who had always been a star in sports and academics, was her pride and joy. The idea that he was now unemployed and squandering his time at the casino was too much for her to accept. Her face flushed with anger, mother-in-law stormed out of the room. When she returned with deliberate steps, I was taken aback to find her wielding a knife. "What are you intending to do? Please put it down," I pleaded, edging away while cradling my son. Mother-in-law closed in slowly, the blade held menacingly aloft. With a chilling precision, she brought the tip of the knife to my throat. "Enough of your insults toward my son. Having a wife like you is dragging Richard down. You're a lazy leech, surviving on a measly $70,000. Leave this house." Her harsh words sent shivers down my spine. Any sudden move could endanger my son. Seeing my silence and the fear etched on my face, mother-in-law seemed satisfied and lowered the knife. "But you understand, there's no place for parasites like you. Just keep quiet and tend to your chores," she spat before retreating to her room. Relieved of the immediate threat, I crumpled to the floor, my son's sobs echoing in the tense air. I comforted him with gentle strokes on his back, but inside, a resolve solidified. We couldn't remain in this house any longer. The casual threat of a knife was unfathomable. She seemed devoid of humanity. I had been swayed by Richard's honeyed words until now. After each argument, I felt compelled to stand by him, believing he'd crumble without me. But I had reached my breaking point. Above all, my maternal instinct screamed to shield my sobbing son in my arms. This environment was no place to raise him. The decision was made. We would leave the next day. In the morning, my mother-in-law's stern voice pierced the air. "Emily, please prepare for my husband's memorial service next week. All our relatives will be attending, so ensure everything is flawless," she commanded before hurrying off to a neighbor's house, leaving no room for my response. The following week marked my father-in-law's memorial service. Richard and my mother-in-law were discussing arrangements for a lavish feast and reminiscing about him. I was tasked with all the preparations, but I found myself mentally checked out. As soon as Richard and my mother-in-law stepped out, I hastily gathered my belongings and fled from their house. I didn't have much, just my clothes, my son's toys, and diapers. When I arrived at my parents' house, they were taken aback. However, as I poured out my heart to them, my mother was moved to tears and enveloped me in a tight embrace. My typically composed father was visibly enraged and instructed me to rest. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was undoubtedly Richard, wondering why I hadn't returned to prepare dinner. I disregard the call and opt to block his number. The following day, mother-in-law and Richard arrived together at my parents' house, banging on the door in the early hours. Though my parents attempt to deter them, I insist they be allowed inside. As I swing the door open, they launch into a tirade immediately. How could you vanish without a word? What kind of wife does that? Isn't it odd to disappear without a trace? Could you please lower your voices? You're disturbing the neighbors. I respond calmly, fighting the impulse to retort, who's the actual issue here? Upon witnessing my firm stance, they attempt to seize me, but my father intervenes. If you resort to violence, we'll call the authorities. Let's discuss this calmly inside first. With my parents by my side, I initiate the conversation with mother-in-law and Richard. Why did you vanish without a word? I was at my breaking point juggling childcare and my job, feeling utterly overwhelmed. You never offered a helping hand despite my pleas. Well, I was occupied as well. Occupied at the casino, as I've mentioned before. Our son doesn't frequent the casino. Stop spreading falsehoods, mother-in-law persisted, seemingly under the impression that Richard was still employed. It's understandable, considering what a dutiful son he's always been. She likely held onto that belief. Sometimes ignorance is a blessing. So, mother-in-law, where do you think Richard is currently employed? At a securities company. I've seen the job offer letter, remember? Well then, perhaps we should give them a call to confirm if Richard is still on their staff. That would settle the matter. Hold on a moment, Richard interjected, clearly flustered. What's the issue if I'm still employed there? It shouldn't be a problem. Well, that's I hesitated, noticing Richard's visible discomfort, then dialed the securities company's number on my phone, switching the call to speaker mode. I ensured everyone could hear as I inquired about Richard's employment status. That individual resigned several years ago, if memory serves me correctly. He was with us for just about a month. The voice from the phone left mother-in-law speechless. Richard, now looking down, clenched his fists. Did you really quit? Why? I pressed. Because it was frustrating. Everything was just grunt work and the boss would yell at me for the smallest mistakes. It was harassment, Richard finally admitted. Why haven't you kept us informed about your activities since then? I've been actively searching for a job. For how long have you been on the hunt? It doesn't appear to be yielding any results. Can you provide a count of how many companies you've applied to so I can verify? Well, the job market isn't exactly overflowing with great opportunities. I'm waiting for the right fit to come along. You seem quite confident in your abilities. By the way, you're currently working part-time, correct? What was your income last month? 700. 700. Didn't you claim to mother-in-law that Emily could barely make 700 and couldn't fend for herself, so you were the sole provider? Apparently, he missiled mother-in-law, suggesting I wasn't bringing in anything, but the reality was quite different. As a dental hygienist, my salary isn't extravagant, but I was making at least $2,000. Upon learning the truth, mother-in-law flushed crimson with anger, shooting daggers at Richard. Faced with the reality, Richard erupted in fury. Why must you do this? This is all you're doing, making me appear foolish. His pride evidently wounded, he couldn't bear the humiliation, slamming his fists on the table in frustration. You shouldn't divulge such matters in public. It's defamation, I uttered in disbelief. If you wish to pursue legal action, feel free, but I'll counter with a lawsuit for your knife threat as well. And let's not forget, lawsuits come with a hefty price tag. Do you have the funds? Richard retorted, clicking his tongue in frustration. It was likely he had squandered all his earnings at the casino. Meanwhile, mother-in-law remained in shock upon discovering the truth about Richard's unemployment. I've laid it all out for her. I'm the sole earner covering all our living expenses. When Richard and I wed, he promised to manage household duties and childcare in lieu of my job. But once married, he failed to fulfill any of those obligations. That contradicts what I've been told. Mother-in-law seemed to blindly trust whatever Richard fed her, right? She became agitated when I requested assistance with chores and childcare. She even resorted to brandishing a knife, commanding me to keep quiet and attend to my housework. I could see my mother-in-law's complexion draining. Standing before my parents, being confronted for her misconduct, she appeared uneasy. Mother-in-law, you haven't contributed a dime to the household either. We've relied solely on my income all this time. I have no intention of continuing to toil for you, so I'm requesting a divorce. Divorce? Hold on a moment, don't just drop such bombshells out of nowhere. Yes, indeed, I'll pitch in as well, so please reconsider and return, they implored. No, thank you, I firmly reiterated, their surprise evident in widened eyes. It was likely a shock for them, accustomed to my usual compliance even amidst shouting or persistent pleas, to hear my unequivocal refusal this time. I refuse to live with someone who resorts to wielding a knife to assert dominance. I'm exhausted from sharing a roof with Richard, who spends his days gambling at the casino. I intend to seek compensation for all the labor I've contributed thus far, as well as child support. That's going to be quite a challenge. I simply can't afford such payments, mother-in-law protested. Well then, cease gambling immediately and start making payments, I countered. But I can't possibly do that. I'm unemployed. Richard's admission left me flabbergasted by his sheer lack of foresight. You're unemployed because you're too selective about the jobs you're willing to take. Do you have any idea what it means to be willing to do whatever it takes? There aren't many companies out there willing to hire someone with no significant qualifications or work experience. Don't take society for granted. Many people are out there working tirelessly in challenging conditions to make ends meet. Yet individuals who quit their jobs on a whim because they're upset or don't enjoy their work, nobody's going to be eager to hire them, he lectures, expressing doubt about Richard's ability to find employment given his current approach. I'll have my lawyer handle the divorce proceedings. Please refrain from contacting me in any way from now on. What about us? How can you be so selfish? What will become of us? Mother-in-law's anger flared at my statement. I'm not sure. Perhaps you should find a way to support yourself, I retorted, deliberately adopting a puzzled expression in response to her heated words. Heartless. I won't tolerate being called that by you. Remember when you referred to me, your daughter-in-law, as a leech surviving on a meager $700 a month? It was you who held a knife to my throat and demanded my silence. And by the way, the lazy individual earning $700 a month is sitting right beside you. Aren't you going to ask him to leave? As I spoke, mother-in-law trembled with rage. Perhaps I had pushed too far. Suddenly, she lunged forward, grabbing my collar. Stop it. I warned you, I'll call the police if you lay a hand on her. My father intervened forcefully, trying to pull her away, but she was too agitated to be restrained. So, not content with threats of a knife, now resorting to physical violence. Barbaric, wouldn't you agree it's best not to compound your offenses? I challenged mother-in-law, met with a resentful glare. Disregarding her, I turned my attention to Richard. I held on to hope that you would change, but I'm relinquishing that now. My priority is to protect our son. I won't burden you any longer. I'll handle the finances, the household chores, and childcare. Please come back. You'll handle the money? Really? Even with careful budgeting, it exceeds $1,000 a month. Can you manage that? Richard's complexion paled at my words. He had never earned more than $1,000 since quitting his job. But I have Mom's pension. So you're admitting you're relying on my pension now? Even my usually composed mother-in-law couldn't contain her frustration at Richard's absurd declaration. I don't have any other options. I'm unemployed. I've been doing some part-time work now, Richard replied defensively. Can't we attempt to resolve things? Mother-in-law interjected, hoping for reconciliation. Finally breaking his silence, my father addressed Richard sternly. Richard, you and your mother have taken undue advantage of our daughter. Had I known your true character, I would have vehemently opposed this marriage. I refuse to allow her back into your home. I'm cutting all ties with you. But I can't imagine life without Emily. Please grant me another chance, Richard pleaded desperately. Don't be ridiculous. Life without our daughter? Yet you're already relying on her. A man unwilling to strive for his own livelihood and to ensure his wife's well-being doesn't deserve our daughter. Leave at once. My father's voice carried an unusual edge, sending shivers down my spine. Richard knelt, head bowed, a pitiful sight devoid of the charm I once saw in him during our college days. Please reconsider, Emily. I'm begging you, Richard implored, his voice tinged with desperation. But my parents remained resolute. They had reached their limit. I refuse to be treated like a servant by the two of you any longer. Please refrain from involving me in anything moving forward, I asserted as we ushered them out of the house, swiftly locking the door behind them. For a while, they pounded on the door, shouted, but when a passing police officer intervened, they hastily fled. Afterward, I learned that Richard had been disowned by his mother and ejected from their home. He now resides in a dilapidated apartment, scraping by on welfare and sporadic part-time jobs. His volatile temper renders him unable to hold down any job for long, leading to a revolving door of positions at convenience stores, construction sites, and the like. Financial strain weighs heavily on him. In his efforts to meet his obligations for compensation and child support, Richard juggles multiple part-time jobs, leaving little room to pursue full-time employment. Rumors circulate that he still frequents the casino and may even be in debt. However, I pay little mind to such hearsay. News of Richard's downfall spreads rapidly among our former high school peers, prompting numerous sightings and updates. Reports of his eviction by his mother and their frequent altercations become common knowledge. His unemployment and abandonment by his wife become public gossip. Undoubtedly, his mother feels a deep sense of embarrassment after years of boasting about her son's achievements. She seldom ventures outside now. With the unwavering support of my parents in managing household duties and caring for my son, I continue to work. I now enjoy more quality time with my son, no longer needing to rely on daycare services. My parents' assistance has provided me with newfound freedom and stability. Taking care of him has made everything so much better. I only wish I had initiated the divorce sooner. Moving forward, I'm determined to cherish every moment I spend with my son and witness his growth up close. I should have been overflowing with joy at finally owning the home of my dreams, but instead, I find myself dreading each weekend. The reason? My husband's parents visit every single week, and each time, I'm treated like a maid. Far from getting a break from work-related stress, I only grow more exhausted with every day off. Reaching my breaking point, I decided to invite my own parents over, hoping it would deter my in-laws from their constant visits. But when I told my husband, he erupted in anger. Don't you dare invite your parents. If you don't like living here, you can leave. Fine, if that's how it's going to be, I'll leave. He'll be the one to regret this decision. My name is Emma, and I've been married to Michael for 5 years. We were previously renting, so the purchase of our new home was a big milestone for us. However, it didn't escape Michael's parents. "Oh, Emma, we heard you're finally buying your own house," his mother exclaimed. "Yes, that's right. If you need any help finding places, just let us know. We're more than happy to assist," she added. "Thank you. We might start visiting some open houses soon," I responded, though the idea of their continued involvement made me uneasy. I had envisioned selecting our new home with Michael as a personal and carefully considered process, but my mother-in-law had other plans. Just yesterday, she showed up unannounced with a brochure for a plot of land that's up for sale. "Emma, what do you think about this property? It's close to the subway station and has enough space for a duplex house." A duplex house? It dawned on me that they must be planning to move in with us. That's why she's been so involved in our property search, offering suggestions like, it would be better to live near the subway to avoid walking too much, or a nearby supermarket would be so convenient. I thought she was simply being helpful, but it turns out she was pushing for features she prefers, clearly with the expectation of sharing our new home. I immediately brought this up with Michael. "Michael, your mother came over this afternoon with a brochure for a plot of land. It looks like she and your father might want to live with us." "Oh yeah, she did mention something like that," he replied. "What? You heard it from your mom? Why didn't you tell me something this important? I thought we'd discuss it once it was more finalized." "Do you have objections, Emma?" "Yes, I do. I envisioned us living alone together. Besides, your parents are still healthy, aren't they? While I can't predict the future, I believe it's best for us to live separately for now to maintain a good relationship." "I understand how you feel, Emma," Michael said. Michael listened to my concerns and managed to convince his parents that we weren't planning to live together at this time. After hearing his reasoning, it seems his parents finally relented. I was grateful to him for handling the situation so well. "Thank you, Michael." "No problem, Emma. If your parents want to live with them, we won't force it. Instead, let's make sure my parents visit our new home frequently after we move in." Eventually, Michael and I found the perfect house and moved in. As soon as we settled, his parents came over to check out our new place. "Emma, congratulations on the move. Your house is wonderful," his mother exclaimed. It seemed she was pleased with our home. "You're always welcome to visit," I replied warmly. That evening, we all enjoyed a meal together at the dinner table. The following weekend, I suggested to Michael that we go shopping for living room decorations, but he seemed hesitant. "Can we put off the shopping for another time? Do you have plans for the weekend?" "My parents wanted to come over," I explained. "What? They just visited last week. They seem to really like this house. Remember, you said, feel free to visit anytime, right?" "Well, yes, I did say that. But could you handle dinner and entertain them a bit?" Soon after, his parents started visiting every week, and their demands grew with each visit. "Emma, it's been so hot lately, and I'm feeling drained. Something light, like noodles, would be fine for lunch. But for dinner, I'd like something hearty like steak. Also, do you know the new pastry shop near the station? It's the talk of the town, so I think it'd be perfect for dessert. Could you pick up some?" They began arriving early in the morning, giving orders, never helping with chores, and then leaving. By the second visit, they even assumed it was okay to stay overnight. "Where's the typhoon? And since your parents enjoy a good breakfast, could you have it ready for us first thing in the morning?" The demands from my in-laws kept increasing. Between managing their needs and my work fatigue, I barely had a chance to rest on weekends, which only added to my exhaustion. Reaching my breaking point, I made a heartfelt plea to my husband. "Michael, I really need your mom and dad to stop staying over every weekend. We can't just refuse them. They've made it clear they want to visit." "Well, you could set some boundaries. Look, with working on weekdays and taking care of your parents from morning till night on weekends, I'm left with no time to rest. Consider this. If we were living with them full-time, it'd be every single day, not just weekends. They originally wanted to move in with us, but since you strongly opposed it, we prioritized your wishes and they agreed to back off. Compared to living together, having them over on weekends might actually be the better option." But it was becoming unbearable to continue this situation indefinitely. As I wrestled with what to do, my mother called. "Oh, Emma, how are you?" "Sorry, Mom. I haven't been in touch lately. I'm managing, somehow. You sound a bit down. Is everything okay?" "Well, actually, I shared with my mother the difficulties I was facing with my mother-in-law's constant visits since our move. My mother expressed concern and said, 'That sounds really challenging. I can imagine how overwhelming it must be with settling in and buying new things. I've been holding off on calling because I know your in-laws visit every weekend. I haven't even invited my own mother to our new house yet. Maybe if I invite her over, your in-laws might hold off on their visits for that weekend.' That evening, I brought up my idea to Michael when he got home from work. 'Hey, Michael, I'd like to invite my parents over this weekend. Is that okay with you?' His response was unexpected. 'No, my parents have already planned to come this weekend.' "But your parents have visited so many times already. My parents haven't been over even once." "That's because your parents haven't mentioned wanting to visit. My mother has been patient, waiting for us to get settled. She's really eager to come." "Oh, really? Well, then, how about scheduling your parents for when mine aren't coming? They've waited this long, they can wait a bit longer. Isn't it odd to always prioritize your parents, who are here so often? Can't your parents wait until next week? You're my wife now. It's natural for us to prioritize my parents. Anyway, you should let your parents know this weekend isn't a good time." "I don't want to do that. You should just not invite your parents. If I can't have my parents over because of that, then your parents shouldn't come to our house either. They gave you to me, so they should be prepared not to see their daughter all the time." "That's unreasonable. Why shouldn't I be able to invite my parents? Even though I'm married, isn't it natural for them to want to see their family?" Despite Michael's firm refusal, I proposed a compromise. "All right, let's skip this weekend, but from now on, let's try to alternate inviting each other's parents on a regular basis. How about that?" "Ah, that's exactly. If you're going to suggest something as troublesome as this, we might as well not invite your parents at all. Let's just end this conversation." "But we haven't resolved anything yet. I've made up my mind. I'm not letting your parents come over. If you don't like it, you can leave." No matter what I said, Michael only focused on his parents, never considering me or my own family. His refusal to discuss the matter and his insistence on his own way finally pushed me to my limit. "Fine, if you're that determined, Michael, I'll leave. And when that happens, it'll be too late for regrets. Regrets? What would I regret if you're gone? Just remember this. I won't accept any apologies. Don't come back asking to return. Leaving behind a Michael who was laughing loudly, I went home and shared what had happened with my parents. They agreed that Michael's stance was unreasonable, with my father particularly upset. A person who can't respect their family is fundamentally flawed. I'm disappointed in Michael. You should stay here and not go back to that house. His words reassured me that I wasn't at fault. Feeling a sense of relief, I resolved to pursue a divorce. A few months later, I received a call from Michael. Hey, how much longer are you planning to stay away? Have you forgotten what day it is? This Saturday. He spoke with a tone of urgency. Oh, right, it's the day we were supposed to host your co-workers at our new house. Yes, exactly. We've been planning this since we moved. Remember? But isn't your mother-in-law supposed to come that day? Why don't you tell your co-workers that my parents are visiting and cancel the gathering? There's no way I can do that. I've invited a new boss for my department, and canceling now could impact my future at work. I don't care. You're the one who kicked me out, remember? Is this really the time to be arguing? Stop sulking and come back. We need to start preparing for everyone's arrival or we won't be ready in time. I'm not coming back to that house. What? Are you really okay with putting my job at risk? I don't mind. I'm planning to leave you. Leave? Are you serious? Yes, I've been considering it since I left the house and my parents agree with me. Your parents too. They're as out of touch as you are. Do whatever you want. I'll have my parents help with the preparations for hosting my coworkers. I don't need you anymore. You're going to regret this. That's what I should be saying. Goodbye. I ended the call abruptly. By now, Michael was probably frantically contacting his in-laws, scrambling to prepare for the office gathering. Since his in-laws had made themselves so comfortable, it was about time they faced some inconvenience. That problematic weekend, our home phone rang in the afternoon. When I answered, Michael's flustered voice came through. Why is Emma answering the phone? I was trying to reach my new boss. Why? Well, because this is my house. Emma's house. Don't tell me the new boss is Emma's father. Yes, my father used to work at Michael's company. He's been away from the main office for a few years as an advisor for a related company's new venture, but he's set to return to the main office next month and will be Michael's new boss. I knew about the internal announcement, but I couldn't reveal it until the embargo was lifted, even to Michael, my husband. I assumed he would figure it out when he saw the boss's name in the announcement, but it seems he didn't check it properly. Michael began to plead desperately. My mother has prepared expensive ingredients and fine alcohol, but no one is coming. When I contacted my colleagues, they said there was a huge commotion at the company because I didn't invite the new boss. If the boss doesn't come, no one else will. They've been asking me to convince my father to come and clear up the misunderstanding. Michael continued. Misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding. It's a fact. You said, don't ever invite my parents to our house, didn't you? I didn't know your father was my boss at the time. Then the situation is different now. That's a rather convenient excuse. I asked you repeatedly if you'd regret this, didn't I? Well, it's too late for regrets now. You're responsible for cleaning up your own mess. I hung up before Michael could respond. I informed my father about Michael's call, but understandably, my father had no intention of visiting. There's no need to go to the house of someone who disregards his own family. My father was even more enraged. My father is scary when he's angry. He was looking forward to using the expensive ingredients and alcohol he bought for today, but it seems all that effort was for nothing. The next day, Michael arrived at our house, looking pale and distressed. Emma, I'm sorry for everything I've done. Let's start over. Please come back home. Instead of me, who was staring at him in shock, my father spoke up. Start over. Do you even understand what you've done? Michael, looking pale, knelt before my father. Sir, I'm deeply sorry for my actions. I'm here to apologize. You've ignored my daughter for months and haven't even bothered to visit her. I didn't realize you'd be so unreliable. That's not the issue. I've been busy with work. Oh, really? I heard you're also working weekends. Weekends? Well, Michael stuttered. It's likely his mother was visiting him every weekend. Michael, who never did any housework, would have struggled without her help. I'm sure she was also assisting him during the weekdays, taking advantage of my absence. My father, sensing the underlying issue, said sternly, "Forget it. It seems you get along well with your parents. It looks like you rushed into marriage before you were ready to stand on your own." That's not true. I do respect Emma's feelings and even turned down the idea of living with my parents. Is it really natural for a couple to decide whether to live with their parents? You kept pressuring Emma to accept your parents and never listened to her. How does that show you're prioritizing her feelings? Well, and marriage means that both families become connected. Yet you invited your parents over every weekend while completely shutting us out. How could you disregard Emma's family like that? I didn't know you were going to be my boss. If I had known, I would have invited you before my parents. That's exactly why I say you're self-centered. You don't understand anything. People like you should be in a leadership role. My department doesn't need someone as selfish as you. But, silence. Get out of my house now and don't ever come back. Afterward, my father advised his superior to remove Michael from his department and reassign him to a regional branch. With Michael's reputation for selfishness, no one defended him. Even his parents, who had once doted on him, couldn't follow him to a remote location. They now see him only once a year, if that. Meanwhile, I've been enjoying the comfortable life at my parents' house after finalizing my divorce with Michael. I focus on my work during the week and spend weekends with the people I love. Reflecting on my past, I appreciate my new freedom and the ability to live a normal, satisfying life. Moving forward, I want to cherish my parents and enjoy living at my own pace. My name is Emily. I live with my husband in a spacious house. We have a son named Richard who reached adulthood a few years ago and moved out. Initially, I felt lonely without him, but I've since adjusted. Still, it always brightens my day when he calls to say he's coming home. One day, Richard called to tell us he was visiting and had someone special to introduce. From the moment we heard this, my husband and I were filled with excitement. Before noon, Richard arrived with a lovely woman by his side. Although I had an inkling from his words, I never truly expected him to bring someone home. My son, beaming with pride, introduced her. Her name is Karen. Isn't she wonderful? She's my wife. I was momentarily stunned, struggling to grasp his words. After a brief pause, I asked, "Richard, did you say Karen is your wife? Not your girlfriend?" Richard nodded with a grin. "Yes, Mom. Maybe you're going a bit deaf." I couldn't bring myself to laugh at my son's teasing. "I haven't heard about you getting married. Did you know about this?" I asked my husband. He shook his head, equally puzzled. "No, I didn't hear anything either." We both turned to Richard, seeking an explanation. With a proud smile, he said, "That's why I came to announce our marriage registration today. By the way, we had a grand wedding in Bali with our friends." We were speechless. Richard, oblivious to our stunned reaction, continued to rave about the wonderful wedding in Bali. My head began to ache, and I carefully asked, "You've already registered and had the wedding. Why weren't we invited?" Karen, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Do we need to invite strangers?" I was taken aback by her words. She continued calmly, "Isn't it a waste of money?" I couldn't hold back my emotions. No, we are Richard's parents," I said, my voice trembling. Karen seemed unconvinced and said with a dissatisfied look, "But you're strangers to me." I was taken aback and fell silent. My son must have finally noticed the tension in the room and hurriedly explained, "Karen has no parents or siblings. It would have been sad if she was the only one without family at the wedding. That's why I didn't invite you guys." Hearing about Karen's situation left me at a loss for words. I thought if that's the case, maybe it could be understood. Of course, I wasn't entirely satisfied, but I told myself it was too late since the wedding was already over. After the newlyweds left, I confided in my husband. "I wonder if those two will be okay." He shared my concern but said, "It's their decision. They're already married. All we can do is watch over them." Although I agreed with him, I couldn't just leave it at that. So I decided to try to bridge the gap with Karen. I got my son's phone number and decided to reach out. When Karen realized it was me on the phone, her tone immediately turned sour. "What do you want?" I realized my call might have made Karen uncomfortable, so I quickly explained my reason. I got some delicious treats and I thought I'd bring them over to you next time." Karen replied, "Oh, I don't need that. In fact, I don't even plan to give you my address." I couldn't help but ask why. Karen calmly answered, "I don't want to give personal information to strangers. Please delete my phone number." Before I could say anything else, she hung up. After that, I couldn't get in touch with Karen. I realized my gesture must have felt like an intrusion to her. Feeling down, I shared my worries with my husband. He comforted me, saying, "There's still time. Don't rush. Forcing closeness won't necessarily lead to good results. Just hope that she'll open her heart to us someday." I took a deep breath and nodded. "You're right." A month after I stopped trying to contact my son and his wife, my son suddenly reached out. "What's going on?" I asked. He told me Karen is pregnant. I was thrilled by the happy news. Knowing how tough it can be for a first-time mother without her parents, I asked for their address so I could go help. But my son said, "No, I can't give you the address. We don't need help, just money. Give me your bank account number so I can transfer it." I tried to explain to my son how difficult childbirth could be, but he wouldn't listen. Moreover, he said that Karen herself was against it. In the end, I transferred only the money as my son requested. After that, I never heard from him again. There was not even a report of the child's birth. A year passed, and despite my attempts to call, I eventually couldn't reach him at all. It seemed my son no longer thought of us as family. Even if I wanted to confirm it, there was no way to get in touch. Feeling helpless, I went to the local supermarket one day and met a familiar face. At first, I didn't recognize him, but when he called out to me, I realized who he was. "It's been a long time. Do you remember me? I'm David Johnson." Hearing the name, my memory came rushing back. He was a friend my son often brought home during high school. I didn't recognize him at first because in my mind he was still a high school student. "David, you've grown up so well," I said, looking at him closely. David seemed pleased and a bit shy. Then I noticed the woman standing next to him. She wore a matching ring with David, and her belly was noticeably large. I involuntarily covered my mouth and exclaimed, "Oh my!" David nodded shyly. "This is my wife, Olivia. Our child is due in 2 months." "Olivia, is it? Congratulations." "Thank you," Olivia said, looking momentarily confused before smiling happily. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, we parted ways quickly, not wanting to impose on the expectant mother. 2 months later, I received an email from David. We had exchanged contact information during our reunion because he wanted to share the news of the birth. The email included a photo of their newborn baby, a truly adorable little one. As I looked at the picture, I couldn't help but imagine what it would be like if it were my own grandchild. I looked at the photo of the baby, someone I had never met, and found myself shedding a few tears. I emailed David, offering to send a gift to celebrate the occasion. Shortly after, a flustered David called me. "I didn't reach out with that intention, so please don't trouble yourself." I couldn't help but chuckle at David's apologetic tone. "That's not it. I just want to celebrate, since I can't do anything for my own grandchild." There was a pause on the other end before David asked, "Something happened with Richard, didn't it?" I remained silent, and David continued. "I was hesitant to tell you, but actually," he revealed a shocking story. Olivia was originally Richard's girlfriend. Richard had chosen another woman and unceremoniously dumped Olivia. That woman was Karen. Olivia was devastated after being abandoned by Richard, and I couldn't leave her to deal with it alone. I tried to convince Richard to make things right, but he wouldn't listen. Eventually, I gave up and ended our friendship. David's story ended there. At that moment, I felt a deep sense of anger toward both my son and Karen, despite being my own child. I also realized that my actions had unintentionally reminded Olivia of her painful past. Even though I wasn't aware of it, I had caused her distress. She likely didn't want to see Richard's mother. "I'm truly sorry for mentioning that I wanted to celebrate," I apologized. David quickly reassured me. "You don't need to apologize, Mrs. Smith. Olivia doesn't mind. She was the one who wanted to send the baby's picture. Please don't worry about it." Their kindness only made me feel more guilty. David then added, "I just don't want Olivia to have anything to do with Richard and his wife ever again." I agreed wholeheartedly. "I'll do whatever I can to help, even if it might not be much." I also shared with David the strained relationship I had with my son and his wife. David was visibly shocked by Richard's recent behavior. We quickly shifted the conversation to lighter topics before ending the call. I relayed everything I had learned from David to my husband. I then told him that from now on, I would consider Richard and his family as strangers. My husband agreed. "At least we can take a breather." I glanced around the room, where most of the unpacking was complete, and nodded. Our new life begins here today. The house we had lived in felt too large for just the two of us. When we were considering moving, we were introduced to this newly built high-rise condominium. We had planned to inform our son about the move, but ultimately decided against it. I headed out to buy ingredients for dinner. As soon as I stepped out the front door, someone called out to me, "Mom." I turned around, unsure of what I was seeing, and there was my son, approaching with a slight smile. "Why didn't you tell me you moved?" I was surprised to find strangers at the old house. "I had to search quite a bit to find you," he said. I met his gaze with stern eyes. "I didn't need to tell you. You're a stranger to me." Richard seemed taken aback by my change in attitude and grew flustered. "What are you talking about? I'm your son." I ignored him and started walking. Richard quickly fell into step beside me and continued talking. Mom, I want to apologize for everything that's happened. I was misled by Karen. You must have some extra money if you're living in a new high-rise condo, right?" Despite Richard's attempts to engage, I kept walking. Seeing that I wasn't responding, Richard's tone grew anxious. Karen was a habitual liar. Her claim of having no family was false. She was actually disowned by her parents due to a romantic scandal at her previous job. When I glanced at my son, he misunderstood my silence and continued to criticize Karen. Karen came to me for money after she couldn't make it on her own after quitting her job. I was just deceived. I should be able to live in that high-rise condo too. I stopped and faced him. He seemed hopeful that I was finally ready to listen, but I held his gaze firmly and said, "You chose that dishonest woman despite being in a relationship with someone else. This is the consequence of your actions." Richard looked stunned by my words. I delivered my final message. "Your only family now is Karen. You two are perfectly suited for each other." Leaving him there, I walked away and contacted David. I was concerned that Richard might cause trouble for David or Olivia. As I feared, Richard had tried to apologize to Olivia and asked David to mediate between us. He even said something absurd like, "You two got married because of me." David, at his breaking point, announced he was severing ties with my son and warned that he would call the police if Richard continued to harass them. In a panic, Richard fled. Afterward, Richard tried to spread malicious rumors about David and Olivia among their mutual friends, but was met with disdain instead. Karen, who was supposed to be his only ally, abandoned him, running off with another man after squandering all of Richard's savings and left their child behind. Seeing the situation worsen, we decided not to intervene despite hearing the rumors. Eventually, Richard came to us with the child in tow. "You must feel sorry for your grandchild, right? Let us stay here," he pleaded. My husband, who had been silent until now, exploded in anger. "Don't be ridiculous. Stop acting like a spoiled child at your age. You're no longer our son but a stranger. Get out." Frightened by our harsh reaction, my son fled, leaving the grandchild behind. My husband quickly locked the front door while I gently picked up the child. The little one, oblivious to the situation, reached out to my husband with a smile. Seeing that innocent smile, my husband and I shared the same thought. While we have no intention of forgiving our son and Karen, the child is innocent. We exchanged a nod and decided to raise this child ourselves. I heard that my son is now doing physical labor, likely struggling to make ends meet with a job he detests. Despite his hardships, he hasn't tried to come back home, though even if he did, the outcome would be the same. My husband and I are fully occupied with caring for our grandchild. Although raising a child at our age is challenging, the child's smile gives us the strength to keep going. For tasks that are too difficult, we rely on the help of David and his wife, for which we are deeply grateful. It seems that a leisurely retirement is still a distant dream, but for now, I want to savor the time with